Author is funded by the Pacific Northwest Writers Association, supporting writers from pen to publication since 1955. To learn more about the PNWA and their yearly conference, please go to pnwa.org.
Hello, this is Brian Mercer for Author Magazine. Today I'm speaking with Joan Ranquet, actor, screenwriter, and author of Communications with All Life, Revelations of an Animal Communicator. Joan, welcome. Thank you for talking with me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Communications with All Life, Revelations of an Animal Communicator. Tell us a little bit about your book.
Well, it is exactly as it says. It's Revelations of an Animal Communicator. It goes first into how I got started, which was a kind of rough personal experience with a horse, losing a horse the night she gave birth, and then raising the orphan colt only to end up losing him. And through that experience in the early 90s, I ended up becoming an animal communicator, and it was an unlikely match because I thought for sure I was destined to have a life in the theater and film. But once once that door opened, I walked through it, and not always willingly at first. But so the book goes into a lot of the stories of how I got started and lots of examples of how animal communication helps, and then a little bit of exercises, things you can do to adjust your own household. And, like if you have two cats that are fighting, I've got lots of little kind of tricks of the trade, so to speak, but things you can do at home to almost reframe the picture for yourself so that you can make the home more harmonious. And also just some basic little exercises in better your communication skills, if, really deepen your telepathy.
You got your education in the theater. Tell me about how that helped you become a writer.
Well, the biggest thing with being in the theater is, especially if you're an actress, but even if you're a technical, a techie, as we call them, you're always reading plays. I mean, every day of your life, you're reading something, and you're understanding character, and you're understanding structure, and you're understanding. I mean, not everybody's able to put that back out, but you're absorbing. You're taking that in every day, and then you're embodying it. You're understanding character. And what I find really funny about that, just even in being an animal communicator, is that when I go to someone's house or I connect with them on the phone to talk to their animal, I look at the whole household almost like it's a play, and the animal in question, the one that someone's having a challenge with, is the lead character. And so I have to think of how this, if you think of a character, the lead or protagonist, they're potentially a hero, but something's standing in the way. So it's like my job is to go in and help move that obstruction so that little dog or cat or horse is the hero in those people's lives again. And that's easier for me to write about than, say, my second book that will be out next year, which was all about energy healing for animals, because in the first book I really told some specific stories with, the dog said this and the people were thinking that. So it was really easy for me to almost reconstruct in a little theatrical form what was going on in the people's homes that made the challenge, and then how we fixed it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. It does help to read things, good and bad, to find out what works and doesn't. Do you ever find that, in your experience, say, in the theater, that you read something that really worked when it was on paper, when you were reading it, and then performing it, it just fell apart?
Unless you're really brilliant, I think that there's a lot of plays. There's so many plays. What's his name? Patrick Shanley is a great playwright. But if you're not an up-to-par actor, it's going to fall flat. There's a lot. Shakespeare could be really dull on stage if you're not a really dynamic actor and understand beats and know how to play every word and every scene and every connection with the other people on stage with you.
So is it true that would be converse, that you think it stinks, but then a good actor could bring it to life?
Rarely, but rarely. I think that the writing is everything, and that's not just because I've always been a writer.
So how did you start writing?
I started, to be quite honest, I've always written my entire life. At least, little bits and pieces here and there, and starting in a journal. I kept a diary since I was as soon as I could write letters, and like hand print letters. So as soon as I learned how to write words, I was writing. And then I always was in a creative writing class, and I wrote a couple plays, and they were produced. And then in college, I got 2 plays produced, 1 play in the college literary magazine. That was one of the plays that was, and then some short stories published years later because my creative writing teacher in college ended up working for a big publisher. So it's just never gone away.
I have to ask, because as a novelist myself, I always wonder, what's it like when you write these characters and you see it performed by actors? Is it usually meet your expectations, or do they take it off in a direction you didn't even think about, or what's it like?
It is pretty dang fun. I mean, I have to say it's really great, and you can get really frustrated if it goes, south on you. But I would have to say that of course, everybody's going to bring a dynamic to it that you could have never even thought of, and that's why I'm saying if the structure isn't there on the page, no actor can save it. I mean, I can't even think of something that the writing wasn't good, but the acting was great, because you wouldn't notice. But an actor is going to bring a real, a dynamic to it that the page doesn't have, and that you couldn't have even thought of. So it's amazing. I did a show for over a year that was something I co-produced, co-wrote, and co-performed, and took it to the Edinburgh Festival, and got Critics' Choice by the London Times. So, I've actually performed a lot of my own work also.
That makes it easier for it to happen right.
Yeah, I could have also been really flat, though. I mean, you still then need a good director.
Oh, right. Sure.
I'll tell you something that, I'm going to probably be struck down for this one. I'll tell you one that was flat on the page. I used to know, and I guess I still know, but back in the day, I knew the guy that, now I've forgotten his name, wrote American Beauty. And we exchanged screenplays. And American Beauty was it was good. It was a really good screenplay. I mean, it was good. It wasn't the best thing I'd ever read, and it wasn't, it was really, really good. It was solid. But you bring in a director, and you bring in those actors, and now those words popped in a way that I guess my imagination just didn't see.
Wow, and how close was what you read, what was seen on the screen?
I would say that it was probably about 5 drafts away, just knowing how directors come in and tear things apart. The fact that he got an A-list director is, that was his first gig.
So you spent time in New York performing, is that right?
New York and L.A.
In L.A. So you started in New York, correct?
Yes.
And you were writing plays and you were performing them, correct?
Yeah, I didn't write as much in New York. I tried to be just a, plain old actor, but I did write a little. I mean, I wrote, but it wasn't anything. I was still kind of writing short stories, and I was writing a play that didn't get performed. And then when I moved to L.A.
What was it that inspired you to move out west?
At the time, New York was kind of going through a little, tough time, and things were moving to the film business. I was getting a lot of film work in New York, and New York's typically a theater town, so I just thought that was a sign. And then I had some family stuff come up, so I came back to the Seattle area, and I was subletting my New York apartment, and I went down to visit L.A., and I just thought, well, maybe that's where I belong. So I moved there and let go of my apartment.
What was it that made you decide to try your hand at screenwriting?
Well, the play that I did, it's a man's world, a 2-woman show that I performed, all over and took to the Edinburgh Festival. And we did it on the East Coast, we did it on the West Coast. It was a really funny premise, and it could have been, there's some ways when I look back that it could have been executed a little better as a play, but because it was a live performance that we did and we changed a lot, there was a dynamic to it that still worked. And we had showcased it all over Hollywood, and a lot of people were interested in it as a screenplay. And we made the terrible, terrible, terrible mistake of saying we wanted to go with it as actors. And we would have sold it immediately if we would have just said, yeah, Cher can play me and so-and-so can play her.
Oh, wow.
All the good. So that was my mistake. But it made me start writing other screenplays.
Do you find that when you have a show like that runs for a long time, and I would imagine you see how audiences react to it, and so it probably evolves over time. You change things, correct?
Yeah, that show we did, definitely, because it was, you could get more bang for your buck out of a funnier line. And one thing that's fascinating is, what we think is funny here in the U.S. was not so funny in the first night at the Edinburgh Festival or in London. So it was like, we had to punch it up. We had to make it different. We had to make it funnier. We had to be more global.
So you did write short stories when you were younger, but what was it like going from writing screenplays to writing a narrative like Communication with All Life? Certainly there's storytelling, but it's also you're conveying information. What kind of transition was that like?
I've had several steps that made the transition, and that is I've written tons of articles. If someone is going from a creative, fiction or playwright to nonfiction, then I think writing articles is a really great way, because it's like you might have 100 words, 200 or 300 words, say, to convey what you need to convey, and it's usually got to be an element of truth. And so that's a good way to kind of get some practice. You have to really be able to articulate and describe a situation just like you would in fiction, so that people get a real feeling for what it is you're writing about. Let's say you're writing about somebody that went to the Olympics, as a nonfiction writing. I mean, you're still going to need to set the stage of, the crowd was anticipating, and you can see the horse's nostrils flaring. I mean, you've still got characters. It's still important to set the stage and to make the stakes high, because nobody's going to read it if it's just boring.
Tell me how you got your contract with Hay House.
Like most things in my life, it seemed to come out of nowhere, but it didn't. I really set it up. It was pretty evident to me in the mid to late 90s that I was heading down this path and not the screenwriting, although I still would get writing gigs here and there. But I was really working a ton as an animal communicator, and I lived in West Hollywood, and so I used to walk down to this bookstore called the Bodhi Tree Bookstore, and when I was in there, I would buy certain types of books, and I started to notice, wow, all these books are published by this Hay House, and I happened to know Louise Hay because I hadn't really known her, but she had been very involved in the AIDS community in the 80s, and that was about when I had moved to LA and, lost a lot of friends from the theater. So I knew who she was, and I saw that everything was published by Hay House, and I thought, the type of book that I like. And so in 1998, I wrote on a little Post-it note that my first animal communication book would be published by Hay House. And so I had written, this whole thing about Hay House will publish my new book, and I wrote it on a Post-it note, and it was always in my desk. And then I put it on Microsoft Word, had little Post-it note things too, so I put it, in the computer. And so I remember then that I noticed that all the people, the recordings I liked listening to were Sounds True. So I started, I said I'm going to get my first recording by Sounds True, and now ironically my second book is coming out with Sounds True. But anyway, I had started a book on animal communication, and whenever I felt really like I'd see that somebody else had gotten a book out on animal communication, I would instantly look up, the newspaper or on the computer, wherever it was, or at the bookstore, who it was, to make sure it wasn't Hay House, because I was like, I'm the animal communicator for Hay House. And so years later, I have a good friend that is an astrologer, and he was possibly going to get a deal with Hay House, and he was talking to them, and he's a great astrologer. So he called me one day and he said, hey, are you sitting down? And I was like, why? What does my chart say? And he goes, no, I've got something really important to tell you. And he had, unknowingly, pitched me to Reed Tracy, the president of Hay House. He had pitched 12 books, and Reed said, I'll take 2 of those. I want to read 2 of those. One was mine that wasn't actually finished, and the other was Gary Renard's Disappearance of the Universe, which he self-published originally. So not only of the 12 projects that he pitched were we taken, we both got published at about the same time. Anyway,
that's outstanding. That's the way you want it. It's the publisher to come to you. That's manifesting right there.
Yeah, and the same with Sounds True was the same sort of thing. Again, it was something I always thought was going to be more for my, my guided meditations. And so I would have never dreamed that I would have gotten a book deal with them. So I had sent them a healing technique that I do with people and animals, and they called me and said, this is a book. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, it's a book. So that's how I got my book that'll be out next year called Energy Healing for Animals.
That's amazing. When your friend pitched your book to Hay House and they wanted to read it, you said you weren't done with it. What happened then?
I I scrambled. I had a call then with Reed. So I had to call the office, and I had a long talk with Reed. So, and I just said that I was, I wanted to put some finishing touches on it. So the truth is it was pretty far along, but I found myself restructuring the whole thing. And I actually attended, I still do this, is I structure almost like you do a screenplay, in that I made the chapters on an index card, and then I put the stories that would pertain or support the concept of that chapter. And then, I found myself rearranging a lot of it. I like cut and paste, and I had a big storyboard up, so I ended up having to move some chapters around. So that went in probably 4 weeks after I talked to him on the phone, and then probably 2 months later I got my contract, and I got notes from the head editor, and I did 2 pretty significant rewrites. I would say that from the time I talked to Reed on the phone, I think the delivery of the final, technically 3rd draft, was that next October.
It's difficult because a lot of times people will come to our conference and an agent will say, hey, I want to see, some chapters, or I want to see the entire manuscript. And in fact, they're not done, and so and they'll do the same thing. Well, the writers will say, "Well, I need to do some polishing," and then they'll have to finish it really quickly. And I wonder how do you know when something's ready to be seen? How do you balance that when something's ready to be seen by someone who's in the position to greenlight your project, or you want to balance getting it out quickly with making it polished? How do you know when it's ready?
I had a theory as a screenwriter that the first draft is like being caught in really bad underwear. You just don't want to ever be caught in bad underwear, right? I mean, you just don't. And the second draft is still, well, I look a little better. And then the third draft is, okay, I finally got some lipstick on, I can go outside. And I would never give anything out to somebody without 3 passes.
And do you vet it with someone, someone else?
I do. I have, it's so funny because I have a friend that was in development in L.A., and we also rode horses together, and we lost touch with each other. And years later, we reconnected, and she lives on the farm here. So she looks at everything. And boy, back when she was in development, she used to terrify me. We were in a writers group, and I actually directed a lot of her material because she was too shy to get up on stage, but she's a great writer. Anything back in the day, I had her read it before I handed it to any producer or director. And, at one point I had four script options, and I was being paid to rewrite other people's stuff. So I really did make a living as a writer for a long time. The thing with my friend Kelly is she is not, she's not going to mince words with me. Yeah, she is a tough one, and so I would just pick somebody that is going to scare you a little for them to read your stuff. All of us have someone in our circle of friends that's probably, if we're writers and we're writing, and you've got a group of people that are going to these conferences and are networking with each other, you all know somebody that would scare the pants off of you if they read your stuff. Give it to that person first.
So you hear people say, agents and editors say, don't give it to a friend because they're just going to tell you like it. But you're saying you can pick someone in your circle. They might be a friend, but they're going to be honest with you when it comes to your writing.
Oh, yeah. I agree with don't give it to your friend that's going to say, oh, it's great. Or somebody that, another thing a friend might do that's a wannabe writer but didn't sit down and type, I'd restructure the whole thing. Give it to somebody that's in this writer's world that is a friend or is not a friend, but has a really critical and discerning eye. I was in writers' groups in L.A. that kicked my butt more than anybody would have in any teacher ever would have.
For your screenplays?
Yeah, or even when I was trying to write fiction, and that's when I started doing a spoken word group with people. But yeah.
It's intimidating because you definitely have to find the right personality group that will be able to give you feedback, but who and also who click with your writing style. And so I think it's delicate balance. And then you don't want necessarily someone. You want someone who's going to be critical, but they're not going to necessarily make you cry.
Yeah, but you know what? I've cried.
Yeah, I
don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I think we all have. Yeah, sure.
I have been mortified. I was mortified with my feedback from Sounds True. The first notes I got from Hay House was, it's very clear that you've written a lot of articles, and it's very clear with your writing style that you speak regularly, and now we need to find Joan's book voice. So in the first draft, please. I'm like, oh my God, what's my book voice, right?
Yeah.
So that was horrifying. And then, and every time I got notes from this editor, okay, this is like the true stories of Joan and writing books. I felt like I'd gone to a Catholic girls' school most of my life, and I felt like every time I got on the phone with the editor, like I could feel my Catholic girls' school. I could feel my knee socks crawling up my, I could feel like I was in trouble again. And so I ended up, right before the last draft, I got 17 pages of notes, and I was flattened by them. And so I laid on the couch for a month, and I said, can I even do this? I don't even know if I can do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. I was a screenwriter. I just have to, I don't know if I can do this. And then finally some part of me got up and would type, a couple words, and then eventually, you know how it goes. You write a couple words.
Yeah, that seems to be it, doesn't it? It's almost like you get that feedback, or you find yourself stuck, and maybe you don't write for a long time, and then it's just a matter of butt in the chair and just typing, and suddenly it's like moving a car with your body weight. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You suddenly you feel the momentum starting to build, and it takes off. But there definitely is that uncomfortable few hours or days in the chair typing away.
Yeah, and it's just, maybe 2 hours you've moved a period around, but that's just it. So I was like, that wasn't even the head editor that made me feel like I was in my Catholic girls' school uniform. So I get invited to Louise Hay's 80th birthday party. This is 5 years ago. And so I get my ticket, and I get a, cute dress, and I get all dressed up for this huge gala event. And, I mean, it's huge, and it's like everybody's there. Wayne Dyer, the whole Megillah, everybody was there. It was at the Four Seasons in San Diego, and I didn't know anybody, and I'm going, and I've gone, that day I was like trying not to have heart palpitations when I'm getting a pedicure, and I'm just like, okay, I'm going to go, this is going to be fun. I had a blast. But one of the first things that happened was all the authors had a red name tag, and all the people that worked at Hay House had a blue name tag, and then anyone else had a green name tag. So I was like, there was no way I was going to drink at first, just because I wanted to make sure I connected with who is my editor, because this has been so hard. And I am looking at everybody's blue name tags, I'm meeting them, and then all of a sudden I find her, Alex. So here's Alex, this this person that has beaten me up. It's like this 23-year-old straight out of Loyola, right? And I said, hi, Alex, I'm Joan. And she's like, oh my God. And she calls all her friends over. This is the animal communicator. So I have this theory, because I'm getting beaten up by these notes, that they must hate me. And here she's like, cannot wait for me to meet all of her friends. So we get so in our heads, we sometimes don't even know what's really going on. Right. And I still talk to her dogs, so.
I think we've all been in that moment where we've been in the fetal position.
Yeah.
Having to, asked to make a change. But, one of the things I find is that, when you're asked to make a change, it's scary, but then you make the change, and it becomes something new. But there's a lot of times I find people resist making those changes because for whatever reason. But it doesn't hurt to try and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But why not try?
And that's just it. And that's going back to what we were talking about earlier with getting a coach or a good support system. You need people around you that are going to scare you a little, that are going to make you grow. If you're doing the same thing and it's the same story, then you're not going to catch the publisher's eye or the agent's eye. But getting someone to say, what if you just moved this around, or you didn't start at the beginning, or you didn't, whatever it is. So there might be something that's so crazy sounding right now that could just switch up and make all the difference.
So you had some really good luck with manifesting your books and getting them published, and I wonder if you could give any advice in terms of how to structure your thinking to manifest those things. What advice would you give to other people to do that?
Like, I always kept that in my drawer, in my desk drawer. So it was like anytime I opened my desk drawer, it was sitting there. And sometimes I could look at it and I'd be like, oh, that's never going to happen.
So your Post-it note with the...
Yeah. I look at a lot of the things that I really wanted in my life. I've hung a picture of a horse on a wall, and I had that horse within 3 weeks. I cannot put horses on the wall because I do not need more horses.
Right. What do you think we can do that, and sometimes things manifest right away, and they're right there, and other times it seems like it's never going to happen, and even though somewhere in your mind, your heart, your spirit.
Okay. When you look at that Hay House thing, I always joke that it took them 6 years to find me. That was a long time in the scheme of things, right? From 98 to 2004.
Sure.
I mean, so I think that what would happen was, at the time I was married to someone that wasn't exactly, I think he used to tell me, Joan, you can only have like a couple big life dreams. It's like, why can't I have, be in full training with horses and go, be a great animal communicator and end up on TV shows and sell books and speak at big events? Why do I have to have just one big dream? I lived with someone that wasn't exactly supportive, so that may have been one thing. So what's your support system around you? And what were the origins of your belief about dream? Because I think that, I had parents that said you can do anything you want, but sometimes they didn't always believe that about themselves. You kind of have to keep working through your stuff. I'm saying don't limit your dreams and really look at what stands in the way, whether it's old belief systems like you can't do it, find out where that, I could track it at the time to a husband, but it's an older tape than that for me to manifest that husband.
What advice would you give to writers who are feeling frustrated with not having success, but they do want to be published in a traditional means, but they haven't found success yet? What would you tell them?
Keep writing and find support groups and find a way to make your writing better. Maybe you want a writing coach, someone, because the thing is, once you get published, then you discover you're in this new business called marketing. But up until that point, and even before that point, how else are you going to get it published? So you have to have faith in what the you have to have faith, period. But you have to have faith in what it is you're trying to get through in the story or the, nonfiction piece. And then you just have to really kind of keep asking yourself, what is the best way to execute this? And I was going to tell you something about the Sounds True story, because this is really important. This book, called Energy Healing for Animals, is a real departure from how I like to write, right? Like, it's easy for me to do communication with all life and have that be here's a story about this family and their dog, here's a story about this horse and her two people, and here's a story. It was a lot of stories. But this is more instructional, and it's more, it's so technical, I can't even tell you. It hurt my hair follicles to write. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And there were times I wanted to give up. I was just like, oh my God, this isn't my book, this isn't me. And then I thought, what is the most important thing here? And it's like, I could get on the phone with someone who had an older dog, and the hips weren't working that well, and they couldn't afford this, that, or the other thing. And, just in the course of a phone session, I was like, well, here's an acupressure point that you could stimulate just while you're watching TV. And I thought, you know what, all these little things I have in my head that I give out every day, it is worth capturing. I'm not going to give up because that message is so much more important than how pained I am by writing this. So I got through it, and it was not it's been the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. But it's worth it because the message is greater than me.
Thanks, Joan, for talking with me today. This is Brian Mercer for Author Magazine. I've been speaking with Joan Ranquet, author of Communications with All Life, Revelations of an Animal Communicator.